The phone call came at 6:12 in the morning. Not the kind meant to wake you gently. The kind that lands like a hammer. A voice, professional and strangely distant, told me that my father's life insurance had several competing claims, and until the situation was resolved, no funds would be released. Competing claims. The phrase kept repeating in my head, like my father's death had become a raffle, or a contest, or a negotiation none of us wanted, but some people were far too eager to join. Then the woman said something that made my stomach lock. Your sister insists she is the primary beneficiary. But we also have an affidavit from your brother stating the policy was meant for him. And your niece, well, she submitted a statement too. I didn't speak. Couldn't. The woman continued. I'm sorry. We will need a legal review. Legal review. Over my father's death. Over the man whose hands shook when he zipped my winter coat as a child. Over the man who used to tuck grocery receipts in his shirt pocket because he insisted life made sense when numbers behaved. He had been gone for 3 days. 3. And my family had already turned into contestants scrambling to grab whatever pieces of him they could convert into cash. But what they didn't know, not yet, was that my father had taken out 2 policies. One old, one new, and one of them still had my name as sole beneficiary, untouched for 26 years. The agent didn't know it. My siblings didn't know it. No one knew it, except me, because 2 nights earlier, while they argued over who deserved compensation, I sat at my father's kitchen table, his paperwork spread before me, realizing that the man they were fighting over had quietly, almost absent-mindedly, left the largest policy in my name. My father had forgotten to update it, and now it was mine. But that isn't the revenge part. The revenge part is what they did when they found out, and what I did after that, because the money wasn't the prize. The truth was, and I intended to reveal it, slowly, meticulously, and with the kind of calm they never saw coming. My name is Margaret Elgin, though most people call me Maggie. I'm 67 years old, retired from a long, steady career as a public librarian. I like quiet things, reading lamps, slow rain, the sound a hardcover makes when you close it after finishing the last page. A lifetime of listening has taught me that the loudest people rarely know what they're talking about. And my family, God bless them, has always been loud. I was the middle child of 3. My older sister, Carol, perfected the art of speaking with authority even when she had none. My younger brother, Frank, could turn a misunderstanding into a civil war before lunchtime. And I, the quiet one in the center, spent my childhood learning how to see patterns before disaster hit. It was a skill that stayed with me. When my father's health began to fail, I was the one who drove him to appointments. I was the one who reorganized his medications, who cleared expired bottles from his cupboards, who filled out forms while he rubbed the ache from his hands. He didn't ask for much, he never did, but he trusted me with his details. His documents. His life's paper trail. He trusted me because I didn't dramatize things. I didn't sensationalize. I simply listened. My siblings visited when it was convenient. Holidays. Birthdays. Occasional check-ins that often came with subtle questions about what Dad planned to do with the house, or whether he had sorted out his accounts yet. But I never asked. Not once. And maybe that's why, when he was still lucid, still capable, still himself, he handed me a folder one afternoon and said, "Keep this. You're the only one who won't lose it." I didn't open it then. I should have. But I was raised to respect boundaries that weren't spoken but deeply understood. After he passed, that same folder would become the beginning of everything. Truth, betrayal, and the quiet storm I didn't intend to unleash. I didn't start as a woman seeking revenge. I started as a daughter grieving a father. But grief has a way of revealing the people around you. Not who they claim to be, but who they are when no one is watching. And my family, they were about to show their true faces. My family tree has always grown sideways. Crooked branches. Tangling roots. Love mixed with resentment, like paint someone kept stirring long after the color should have settled. Dad was the stabilizer. The calm. The quiet gravity that kept the rest of us from drifting into foolish quarrels or petty rivalries. When he died, the balance died with him. Carol arrived first after the news broke. Her grief sounded like performance, long exhalations, dramatic pauses. She kept saying phrases like, "I'm the oldest, so the responsibility falls on me," even though she hadn't been present for most of Dad's final year. Frank arrived hours later, smelling faintly of stale beer, jittery with frustration, already muttering about expenses and costs and how things need to be fair. Fair. That word again. My niece, Frank's daughter, Lena, showed up with a notepad, like she was preparing for an interview. She kept asking questions about anything that might translate into money, possessions, savings, assets. No one asked the important questions. What Dad had been trying to say in his last week. Whether he was comfortable. Whether he was scared. I felt an ache watching them, like observing strangers wearing my family's faces. When I suggested we spend one evening simply sharing memories before worrying about anything else, Carol snapped that we don't have time for nostalgia, and Frank started pacing, muttering about funeral costs and reimbursements. It was that night, while they argued in Dad's living room about who should take charge, that I noticed the folder Dad had given me months earlier, tucked neatly on the bookshelf beside his worn-out almanacs. I opened it in the kitchen, alone. Inside were insurance documents. 2 policies. One updated 5 years ago listing all surviving children as beneficiaries. And another older one, untouched since I was 40, still naming me as the sole inheritor. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The arguments in the next room were growing louder, sharper. Some people inherit heirlooms. Some inherit houses. I inherited a quiet truth. And the truth was about to change everything. It began with whispers. Soft at first. Then pointed. Then unmistakably orchestrated. Within days of Dad's passing, my siblings created a group chat titled Estate Logistics, a name that sounded responsible but became nothing more than a battlefield for entitlement. Carol insisted Dad had promised her a larger share because she was the eldest. Frank insisted Dad had helped me less over the years, so fairness required compensation. Lena claimed she deserved something because she checked on Grandpa too, which really meant sending him one text every 3 months. Then came the blow. Without telling me, they contacted the insurance company, together, claiming they were the rightful beneficiaries. They accused me of withholding documents, said I was trying to control the estate, accused me of manipulating Dad in his final months. I found out when the insurance representative called and said, "We've received concerning allegations about you, Mrs. Elgin." I remember standing in my kitchen, holding the phone so tightly my fingers tingled. Concerning allegations. That I was some kind of schemer. A thief. My own family had turned me into the villain before I had even taken a breath to defend myself. But then something worse arrived in the mail. A notarized letter, signed by my sister and brother, stating that I had no legal claim to any of Dad's insurance policies and that I should step aside to maintain family harmony. Family harmony. The hypocrisy made my chest go cold. They weren't fighting me because they believed they were right. They were fighting because they assumed I wouldn't fight back. They believed silence meant weakness. They forgot silence is sometimes strategy. They thought I stood between them and easy money. They didn't know Dad had already made his quiet decision decades earlier. And they definitely didn't know I had copies. Every document, every signature, every policy number, preserved exactly as Dad had handed them to me. But the final betrayal came when Frank confronted me in person. He stood on my porch, hands shaking from anger, and said, "Just sign whatever we need you to sign. You're not entitled to anything. Not entitled. After everything I did for Dad. After every mile driven, every form completed, every night spent in the hospital. Their betrayal wasn't about money anymore. It was about erasing me. And I decided right then I would not be erased. I approached the situation the way librarians approach chaos. With organization, patience, and relentless quiet. I gathered every document my father had ever handed me. I created a chronological binder. Tabs. Notes. Copies. Then I visited a lawyer recommended by a former colleague. A calm man with silver hair and a slow, methodical way of speaking. He asked me to explain everything. I did. No embellishment. No dramatics. When he reached the part about my siblings accusing me of manipulation, he set his pen down and said, "Do you have proof of your father's state of mind during those years?" I nodded. I had journals documenting his appointments. Voicemails. Medical records showing cognitive clarity long after the last policy update. When I showed him the untouched, decades-old policy naming only me, he leaned back and exhaled softly. This is ironclad. And because it predates the others, it carries significant legal weight. What about the accusations? I asked. He smiled gently. False. And easily disproven. Your siblings are confusing desire with entitlement. Desire with entitlement. Yes. That was exactly it. Over the next 2 weeks, we built a file so thorough it could have withstood a hurricane. Call logs. Emails. Screenshots of the messages they sent. Demeaning, demanding, attempting to intimidate. My lawyer drafted a letter for the insurance company clarifying the validity of the older policy and requesting expedited release of funds. He also advised me, calmly, firmly, not to confront my family. But I wasn't planning a confrontation. I was planning clarity. Truth has a way of outlasting shouting. While they bickered in group chats about dividing the money equally, I stayed silent. While they argued about funeral reimbursements and imaginary future payouts, I stayed silent. While they plotted how to pressure me into signing away my rights, I stayed silent. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes it is preparation. And then, one ordinary morning, the email arrived. Your claim has been approved. Funds will be deposited within 48 hours. 48 hours. 2 days until truth and consequences would collide, that I could have taken the money quietly. Deposited it. Walked away. Let them fight over the scraps of the second policy like gulls over a piece of bread. But something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger. It was resolve. All my life, I avoided conflict for the sake of peace. I let louder people set the tone. I stepped back so others could step forward, even when their motives were questionable. But this time, stepping back would mean validating their lies. And I wasn't willing to do that, not for myself, and not for my father. So I decided to tell them the truth. All of it, with documentation, with precision, with the calm they mistook for fragility. I invited them to Dad's house, the house they were already circling like vultures. They arrived irritated, suspicious, ready for a fight. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match their energy. I simply placed the binder on the table. The insurance company has approved the claim, I said. 3 pairs of eyes widened, hungry. And which of us, Carol demanded, is receiving the funds first? I opened the binder to the first policy. This one, I said, is the updated policy. You 3 will need to resolve your claims among yourselves. And you? Frank asked. I turned the page. This, I said, is Dad's older policy. The one he never updated. The one naming me as the sole beneficiary. Silence. Then disbelief. Then outrage. They accused me of forging documents. Of hiding paperwork. Of tricking Dad. Of exploiting an old man. I listened to every accusation without flinching. When they finished, I slid forward the letter from my lawyer and the official approval from the insurance company. This is not up for debate, I said softly. What you choose to do with your own policy is your business. But this, I tapped mine, was Dad's choice. They stared at me like they were seeing a stranger. And maybe they were, because I had finally chosen not to be small. After that day, the unraveling happened quietly. My siblings tried to contest the policy. They failed. They tried to accuse me of fraud. The insurance company responded with a detailed letter explaining the legitimacy of my documents and the invalidity of their claims. They tried to pressure my niece into filing her own petition. She withdrew once she realized she could be liable for making false statements. Slowly, their narrative, the one where I was the villain, fell apart under the weight of facts. And then came the financial consequence. Because in their scramble to secure the first policy, they had each hired separate lawyers, paid individual filing fees, and sunk money into consultations that led nowhere. 3 people fighting over one policy that still hadn't been released. Meanwhile, mine had already been deposited. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't celebrate. I didn't taunt them. I simply lived my life. But their downfall wasn't financial. It was reputational. Relatives they had complained to stopped sympathizing. Neighbors who once nodded at them began asking pointed questions. Even their own friends started distancing themselves after learning they had accused me, the daughter who cared for Dad the most, of manipulation. Quiet truth is more devastating than loud accusations. And the quietest moment of all was when Carol sent me a short message. We didn't know. We thought never mind. No apology, but an admission of defeat. Frank never messaged. Pride is a heavy anchor. Lena wrote the only sincere note. I'm sorry. I believed them. I shouldn't have. By then, the damage was done. But so was the justice. Dad had made his choice decades earlier. And I had simply honored it. Grief is strange. It doesn't wait for life to settle before demanding your attention. It presses into the quiet moments, the ones without conflict or chaos, when truth finally has space to breathe. After the insurance storm passed, I allowed myself to mourn. I sat in Dad's armchair with a blanket draped over my knees, the way he used to sit on winter mornings. I brewed his favorite tea. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator and tried to remember the sound of his laugh. The money didn't comfort me. It wasn't meant to. But it did offer something unexpected, clarity. Not about my siblings. They had revealed themselves. The clarity was about me. For decades, I accepted the role of the quiet one, the accommodating one, the peacekeeper. But caring for Dad had changed me. It had taught me that gentleness is not weakness, that silence is not surrender, and that boundaries are a form of love, to oneself, and to the memory of those who deserved better. I used part of the policy to establish a small scholarship in Dad's name at the local community college. He valued education, even though he never had the chance to pursue it himself. The rest I used responsibly, slowly, thoughtfully, just as Dad would have wanted. My siblings eventually stopped contacting me altogether. A painful peace, but peace nonetheless. And in the quiet that remained, I rediscovered something I hadn't felt in years. My own voice, that if there is anything I've learned from this chapter of my life, it's this. People reveal themselves when money enters the room. But truth reveals itself when silence follows. My family thought they were fighting for an inheritance. But what they were really fighting for was the illusion of control. Dad made his decision long before any of us knew we would need to understand it. He chose based on trust, not obligation. And in the end, that trust became my protection. Revenge, to me, has never been about destruction. It is about illumination. Letting people's own behavior become the consequence they swore they didn't deserve. If you listening to this, find yourself surrounded by people who twist grief into opportunity, who shape lies into weapons, who mistake your quiet for weakness, remember this. You do not need to shout to defend the truth. You only need to stand firmly in it. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it is a soft, steady voice saying, "No, not this time." And that is how I honored my father. Not by fighting for money, but by protecting the truth he entrusted to me.